listening to the Ones Ready podcast, a team of Air Force Special Operators forged in combat with over 70 years of combined operational experience, as well as a decade of selection instructor experience. If you're tired of settlement and you want to do something you truly believe in, you're in the right place. Now here's your favorite CCT personality, JTAC extraordinaire, embracer of the ridiculous face, and like the shortest operator you'll ever meet, Peaches.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the team room. You're listening to the Ones Ready podcast. I'm Peaches. I've got Trent, and we have got a returning guest, retired Chief Master Sergeant Chad McCoy. Thanks for joining us. But before we get into the conversation, I did want to hit one of our partners, Eberly Stock. You guys check them out. They've got great gear for hunting, military rucks, clothing. I guess clothing and apparel would be the exact same thing, but that's okay. They've got great hats. But really their bread and butter are their rucksacks and whether it's military or hunting. What's pretty cool is some of those, 1 day or 3 day packs that they have actually have concealed holsters in them as well. So you can, protect yourself, go out hiking, go out hunting, and you'll be ready. And then funny enough, we have a promo code with them. So if you want to save some money on any of that stuff, it is OR10. OR10, and you get yourself a discount, and it supports them, supports us, and we appreciate you guys checking them out. And then if you have time, make sure that you're following us on any kind of social media platform. Go on to Apple Podcasts and follow, and please leave a review. That'd be awesome. You can tell us how bad we're doing or how great we're doing. So we'll go from there. Chad, second time. Last time we spoke was we were still in Afghanistan. We were still, not necessarily getting out of it. We were definitely on our way transitioning out of Afghanistan, but, we were still there, and the whole, HKIA evacuation hadn't occurred or anything like that. That was still an unknown at that point. So, since we're talking about that, and I decided to bring it up, I won't ask you your feelings on that, but, what's it? I know it's weird for me thinking that we're actually out of Afghanistan. How about for you? Because I know you've got a lot of deployments over there as well. Yeah, I'm glad we didn't do the podcast after that, because it would have been there would have been a lot of rant and raving. There's a lot of emotions attached to that. It's hard to watch that go down the way it did. And I was traveling back from Ohio, and I was in an airport in Atlanta. And people are laughing, smoking, and joking, watching TV. And I asked I was at a bar having a beer, and asked them to switch it to, one of the news channels. And I think the worst part of that whole experience was that it really only affected a small, sliver of the population. They were emotionally attached to it. And so that was even hard to watch just from a bystander. And it's really weird being a retired guy, kind of being helpless, not a part of it, after coming from a unit that was always in the mix. And so, maybe it was cathartic, to kind of watch that process happen. And now that it's over, kind of move on. But I know those families that lost, Marines and the soldier that died in the explosion probably aren't moving on too well right now. So they're not forgotten, in my household. I'm sure not in yours as well. So
it has some. I'm sorry. When I watched the whole thing go down, it reminded me of what it was like coming home from a deployment after, losing some friends. And I imagine what it's going to be like post-career or whatever, like you come home and everything's normal. People are just like, that's happening over there to these people. That's not my problem as an American, and you just spent a fair amount of your life over there, doing what you do and doing the best you can. And you come home and you're exhausted, and you're kind of like, like it's mixed feelings. You're proud, but also some bad stuff maybe went down. And then you go to the grocery store, and that's always where my brain goes. You go to the grocery store and see people being like, picking up the Hot Pockets, and you're like, man, you don't even understand what it takes to make this all possible.
Yeah, it's weird. I don't know if there's any good way to reintegrate post-deployment, but that one for sure is different because, if you leave unfinished business, it was always unfinished business. There was never any real coherent strategy of how we're going to win. But you're going to get another shot at it, and there's always, for guys that are in our line of work, it's exciting to get to go to. I say this with all due respect. It's always exciting to go to war, and like get to do your job and those things. But closing the door on that, with everything kind of being in flux, that's a tough pill to swallow, man. I feel for those guys that are out there. My former unit had a lot of dudes on the ground. I heard a lot of good things coming from the stuff they were doing at the airfield. And, I'd be honest with you, as a, prior chief, the 24th, I was praying hard for those guys, man. I was really worried that, if the enemy cratered the airfield, those guys were stuck, and, fortunately everyone got out and, with, I guess, reduced impact of, we lost some folks in the front end, but we got the majority of the guys out. I went to a senior leader engagement for the Air Force, the AFA conference, and it kind of hurt to listen to senior leaders talk about the success of the withdrawal of Afghanistan, because I guess I don't really have to hold my tongue, but it was a
no, you don't have to hold your tongue.
It was a disaster, man. I mean, think about it. A few guys, made it work, like it always does. But I'm kind of sick of SOF having to, fix all these problems. Small teams of guys coming in, being creative and making it work. Why don't we institutionalize these things? Why don't we get this process to work every time? Why don't we listen to lessons learned and document and put them into action and training? I know SOF does. I think we do a pretty good job learning lessons. We still learn, we're still talking about lessons learned from like Somalia, and it's integrated into training, and think how long that was. And so conventional units needed to kind of change their approach to training, have some ability to be reflective and be self-aware to say, hey, look, we're not good at this. We're going to be better at this. And like I told you guys last time before, Afghanistan even happened, is that we're coming into kind of the lull right now, maybe before the next storm. But this is an opportunity to really get good at training and where they go and how they approach problems and potentially reorient, and Trent, this is our first time talking, but, we talked SR a little bit, and, SR is the blank slate to me. It's like, I can go a lot of different ways and be really impactful. So yeah, that's how I feel about that without getting too far into it.
Well, when you talk about, 2 points on that. One, when you start talking about, SOF coming in, fixing problems, to take it on a lighter side, I immediately think of Pulp Fiction, Harvey Keitel, the Wolf.
Yeah, the Wolf. Yeah,
that's right.
I
mean, that is what SOCOM is. SOCOM is the Wolf. And right. That's just what we do. But I mean, everybody's heard us talk about it before. Like, that is why we are looking for problem solvers, because you're talking about, being able to, I know it's so cliche, thinking outside the box, but that's really what it is. It's getting out of that normal, like, well, hey, this is what we do. This is what doctrine says we do. And you can go, right. Hey, use doctrine as a point of departure. Like, okay, yeah. This is doctrine. Now let's go explore, as a way. Right. The other point is, I think that, and it wasn't necessarily missed within our, batch of friends and community, but like a lot of those pictures of the PJs and the guys out on the ground that are helping, like that was the positive part about it. Yeah, it was. Right. It was a really bad situation, but I tell you what, the amount of PJs that were out there doing really, really good work, and it was only captured a handful of times and shared amongst friends and a little bit on social media, but like a lot of that wasn't covered at all, which is unfortunate, because the guys did some really, really good stuff out there.
That's the ugly part of this, is that those guys are faced with those decisions and those choices. The American public just sees the kind of the aftermath, and they see, the opinions on the news channels. And the reality is, they're human beings, man. And they're left in a really chaotic environment now. And if they didn't get out, there's a lot of desperation in that country right now. And, we're not necessarily going to be a part of it anymore. And there's a lot of nonprofits that are involved and, still doing rescue and stuff out there, which is cool, but, not at the scope and scale that took place during that week. But yeah, you're right. And something you said, man, about SOF coming and, kind of cleaning up things like the Wolf. people always think that SOF is really expensive capability. It's actually the cheapest capability in the DoD. Per guy, it's expensive, right? So you might spend $10 million on me over a lifetime, over a career. But what does it cost to mobilize a force and get them in place, feed them logistics, all that stuff, and move them? It's super cheap to bring in a small team of guys, spend a few $1,000,000. I think it's the sticker shock and some of the equipment, maybe, for a single guy. But if you put it in perspective, it's a really economical option that the DoD has, and they know it. If you look at budgets, and Peaches, I know you still got to look at budgets. I'm glad I don't. I look at different budgets now, but you look at the disparity between some of these, like look what the 82nds, their budget is year to year, compared to an ST unit, and you're like, yeah, we got a couple $1,000,000. Like, all right, we can go train. It's a different story when you have a fleet of vehicles and aircraft and stuff like that. So yeah, I agree with you, man.
But I mean, you said 10 million, and I know you're just throwing out a random number, but
yeah.
I mean, $10 million to train one of us, that's probably 5 years of training, maybe. Like to train one person and to extrapolate it for people. You're not only talking about like, okay, you're paying me, you're paying for the equipment, but you're paying for everybody else that's involved. Now we're talking about maintenance on aircraft, paying for the fuel, right, paying for the munitions, like all that stuff. So that's how it's easy to get to $10 million for one of us in a 5-year span kind of thing. So
it's dangerous to talk money when maybe taxpayers are listening and they're not familiar. And if you start saying stuff like budget dust, I mean, so there's, it's a lot of money. It could come across as not great. So, I mean, I just want to throw it out there. Like we say these numbers, like, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then we attach words to them, which is normal within the
I'm not sure people even care about budgets anymore. I mean, if you look at what's going on right now, I don't know, man. Like, you're talking trillions of dollars, and where does that go? $1 million for some ST guys.
I can tell you right now, I'm looking at a budget. I'm like, ooh.
Yeah, as a taxpayer. Yeah. No, I'm with you. But I think also SOF, they're pretty good stewards of the government's money as far as, like I said, the economy of it. And so, to put Trent, to your point, to put it in perspective, the return on investment is very high. And so, when I was running training, when I was running Green Team, we had a pretty good budget, but like Peaches is saying, you want to send guys to the best, shooting course, best driving course. Jump training is very expensive to do right. That training is really expensive, but there's a concept that's been brought up a lot lately. It's called Agile Combat Employment. I don't know if they're talking to you guys about it, ACE. So the Air Force is going to this, they want to, and they're using AFSOC as kind of like the test bed. And they're saying, okay, well, if AFSOC can do ACE, maybe we can do it at scale for these other units. My perspective as a former guy, like literally I retired this year, right? So I'm not too far removed, but when you talk about doing FARP, when you talk about doing rearmament of munitions, how much logistics come with that, the fuels guys, the maintenance folks that come with aircraft, the Army rotary wing aviators, the pilots get out and they turn wrenches, man. I see these guys covered in oil after a flight and up there breaking apart the top, and those capabilities give you the ability to be agile and do combat employment. But if you continue to have this giant logistics tail and people aren't really dual purpose, you're not gonna, you might not get there as fast as you want to. The reason that we can economically is that, you two, we can send you guys to any country and you make it work. And you make it work in kind of the myriad of capabilities, right? It's not just, setting up an airfield, and it's not, looking at the security footprints and those things. It's everything. And so if it's bringing folks in, you understand logistics, you understand how to get money while you're deployed and find those funding lines. You understand how to work with partner forces, to a certain extent. And then when you pile on other soft forces, language capabilities with SF, a really refined capability to deal with big Navy assets. When you're talking about SEALs, like they have those touch points. Our greatest capability is our ability to integrate air. And, that's a pretty powerful capability right now, especially when we're looking at the Pacific and, hub and spoke and all these different islands. It's going to take small teams of guys go out there and, determine viability and feasibility and set things up and work with, logistics folks on site to, repave runways and do all those things. So it's really a force multiplier in a way that people don't understand, or have really seen. When you experience it firsthand, maybe you're a ground force commander with a conventional unit. You're like, damn, man, this is a cool cape I have. But it's like a flash in the pan, right? Then you're on to the next task. So,
but I think the reason we're able to do that is not only are we the Air Force, we're used to viewing things, I think, from that perspective of big picture, especially early on in our careers. It's if you don't have the correct leadership, allowing the young up and comers to see the big picture and spending more time with them and enabling them to get after those mission sets. Like that's the difference between us and a conventional force, I think. Because I hear these things and I'm like, yeah, that's great. And as like I just sent my wife out on a deployment, and we were always complaining about the way that the conventional forces, all the hoops she has to jump through and all this other stuff, and how much time everything takes versus when we were in AFSOC. But I think it's just, if you don't have leadership, holding people accountable and allowing them to do their job and to see the big picture, I don't think you're going to see that capability come to fruition.
I got to unpack something. So you sent your wife on a deployment. Is that an option for all of us, or is that something? How do you send your wife on a deployment?
She.
Are you her boss at work?
No, I mean, she left. She was like, I got to go. So
okay.
I help her pack her bags, and I do these things. And I drop her off at the airport, and she tells me watch the kids.
Like that's unique. And what you said is really important. I actually wrote it down while Peaches was talking. Is that how do you enable this mindset? How do you enable this capability as a leader, right? And you guys are both senior guys. Well, you got to give people the opportunity to fail in training. And you also got to demonstrate what the realm of possible is. So there's guys that are uniquely suited to making stuff work. Everyone has them on a team. It's the guy you go to maybe when you're in your 20s and you needed a keg. He just go figure it out, right? But as you get those guys, that those attributes have to be cultivated and encouraged. And you're right, man. Like it's mindset, and it's also leadership's responsibility not to shut people down early, because you can destroy that initiative and that fire in the system and kind of the status quo of what the military is, right? And so SOF kind of goes ebbs and flows into like, hey, we need to get things back on track. I want to go more conventional as far as like discipline those things, and that's fine. Good order and discipline is essential, but how do you take risks within that calculus? And that's a challenge, man. I think the reason that things like all these missions that we kind of go back in our history and say, man, it was successful. Those guys did some rowdy stuff to get the job done. If you look at Vietnam, if you look at Desert One, like Coach Carney going in on a motorcycle on the CIA bird and doing this remote, survey. And man, I'm sure he didn't have an ORM. I'm sure the motorcycle probably wasn't a military one. He probably bought something off the local economy. And so, those are the things that sometimes it's seeing someone do it that sparks that idea and kind of the opportunities for a young guy to say, oh, I'm allowed to do that. And that's relative to combat as well. We didn't really touch on this last time we talked, but I'd never, fired my weapon in anger. And candidly, I've been fired at, but I didn't really know where it was coming from. But the first time it really happened, I was looking around to the left and right with the Navy guys I was with, and they were all moving forward because they already done it before, right? And so here I was a new guy. I'm like, I go forward. Am I allowed to shoot? And like they start shooting. I'm allowed to shoot. And you slowly start to condition yourself to what your ability is, and then you're in a situation where you're like, oh, they're shooting, I'm going to shoot back, and it's like this trained behavior. Some guys have that naturally. Some guys take a lot of risk in that realm. I was like, I don't want to. Am I allowed to shoot right now? Everyone's got their lasers on it. Maybe we're just lasing people. But I think that creativity and innovation is the same way. And if we want innovation to exist within our spaces, or your spaces, say our, I gotta stop doing that. You gotta let people fail. You gotta let people break some things. And as long as they're doing it and they're respecting, the processes that are in place, they're not doing anything unethical or illegal, let them do it, man. The problem is that, and this is Chad McCoy's opinion, is the problem is that we have these leadership sprints, right? And so if you're a senior, you want to make chief, man, you better keep your nose clean for a little bit, right? Or you can do it the kind of the weird way that I did it. You kind of accidentally make rank along the way. But certain people know that, like commanders, you're a 2-year command tour. Do you really want to break glass along the way? You know, if you're lieutenant colonel, you want to make 06. I don't know. And I've seen some great ones say, I don't care. And they still have been successful. But, you know, how do you encourage that behavior from senior leadership? I'm talking on like the GO level. How do you encourage your commanders to do those things and take risk? And then for the chiefs to know that they have the ability to, to empower that as well. So just a few thoughts. Innovation, like it doesn't happen without those guide rails, in my opinion.
And there's a lot there. So you're not the only one. I remember I hadn't fired my weapon up until this point, and I was in the back of a Humvee, and there was a vehicle that we were telling to stop, and it was quickly approaching, and and I'm sitting here going like, because I'm scared because you hear about 15-6s, you hear about dudes getting, civ casts or civilian casualties for those that don't know, so you're worried. You're like, I don't want to be that guy that messes up.
That's right.
And at some point, a car is quickly approaching, vehicle-borne IEDs are a thing, and you're like, man, I really need to make a decision, but I'm too scared to mess up until finally, the guy in the turret goes, and I'm back there with the 249, and it's like, okay, well, it's actually time now. And so you light them up, and then from then it's never an issue because you're like, okay, well, I'm making the right decision. But that first time it was definitely like, ooh, I'm scared. But it's funny because, okay, so what is that rooted in? Is it okay? You don't want to be that guy that makes a mistake. Are we afraid to get in trouble? And now this kind of goes into the other stuff that you're talking about and allowing people to fail, allowing people to push the kind of limits. I think we've got to ensure that if somebody does mess up or make a mistake, like we want them to, we don't necessarily want them to fail, but failure is where learning happens. So we kind of do, or at least we want them to go to a point where right before failure. But I don't know.
Risk is essential in this calculus, right?
Yeah.
Risk is essential within SOF. And leaders hate to hear that because we're always talking about mitigating risk. Yes, mitigate risk where you can. But when you talk about when you get into like, high risk training, that has a time and place to do it. There is a time and a place to do a wall walker hey-ho, to a remote DZ, if it's a validation, but that's inherently risky. And we have a great track record of not having, a lot of, accidents. That I had a training accident while I was the chief of the 24th. We had, and there was that period of time where we had a lot of training accidents. We, one at the dive school, had one during the rodeo at STTS, but those things happen, right? And now if there are steps in there that can be mitigated, absolutely, that's what our responsibility is as leaders. But every time you jump out of an airplane, you risk dying. That's a fact. And the problem is that old guys like me, and I had a couple thousand jumps. I got to the point where I wasn't scared to jump out of the airplane anymore. And then you're like, oh, did I get a GMPI? If you're doing a lot of jumps at a civilian drop zone.
Yeah.
And GMPI is not going to save your life, but it might catch something, not on a sport rig, but on a military rig for sure, because it was overly complicated. But risk is there. And so, and then going to combat, shoot, we've done really well, and my fear is, and we kind of touched on this last time, we were kind of, being philosophical about the next fight going to be, what's essential to win in it. And no one really knows, but, the fact is that the guys that know when to shoot back, like you just described, the guy on the, in the turret in the 249, if I put you in there right now and you saw something didn't feel right, you'd be weapons free. Right. And the problem is that the Chad McCoy from, my 20s that didn't know whether I was allowed to shoot back, those guys are going to learn that on the X. And all of the old guys that are like they're eventually going to attrit. And so we're going to get to a weird spot. It's kind of like that 80s and 90s syndrome. You had a few guys that did some combat. Everyone else was, pretending like they were in training, but they didn't have the reps. It's easy to shoot flat range and be a stud on the flat range. But you see guys that suck on flat range, but are just, badasses on target. It's because when you put a laser on somebody from 20 yards, it's not rocket science, right? So, but it is composure. It is knowing appropriate targets. And you talked ethics in the beginning briefly, or maybe before we started. But ethics is something that's near and dear to my heart. Not necessarily. I mean, for the guys, for sure. I mean, it's something I always talk about. But when we talk about autonomy, I think that's something we really need to discuss ethics about. It's probably not in our bailiwick, our circle of control. But we're going to go to autonomy with a lot of the things that we have. It's coming, man. And so, who's the software engineer who's writing the code? So, don't do that.
But autonomy outside of, AI, like giving, and you were involved in this, just like, all three of us are, is that we're not talking about machines having autonomy, like people. Like, that's hey, right, man, I trust you to go out there. You're going to get put in very difficult situations that are all of the above. Ethically challenging, morally challenging. And listen, you are going to make mistakes along the way. You're going to, we're human. That's what we do. But I need to know that unless it was malicious or something like that, I shouldn't necessarily hammer you for something, or I should not, or I should be the shield essentially that like, what, you go do that. If there's anything that comes down for it, like, I got you, you go do what you've got to do. Just make sure that everything's ethically and morally sound, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, I don't know how many senior leaders, peruse this channel and watch. Hopefully they do. But I will tell you that here's what I think is important, is that our guys, and this isn't just exclusive to the 24th guys, the guys across ST are put into positions where they join a tribe that's already exists, right? And so tribalism is a real thing within SOF. It is within the military, but especially within SOF and small teams. So we join them as an outsider. And we remain an outsider. You might be friends with the guys, you go to combat with them, but it's their tribe. And so you inherit their culture, you inherit kind of their expectations. And as a young guy, you want to exceed those, right? And so this is an ethical trap. And I don't think leaders within the Air Force give it enough credit that, you send a young PJ to go work with him, and he's got to make the conscious decision on his own as an outsider, as a singleton, to do the right thing at risk of being ostracized by that group. That is heavy, man. And I've always been proud that the guys would come back and they, we didn't have a lot of those issues, and the services did. It was the Army and Navy, a lot of issues, and our guys kept their noses clean. I know guys have done, things that were wrong overseas. I know that people make mistakes, people make bad choices. But when you talk about the scope and scale, we haven't had these big controversial things happen. And I think that's a testament to the maturity of the guys. And there's something in there. I don't know if it's leadership or training, or maybe we're just hiring the right people, But I think that when a lot of this stuff happened and they did the SOF ethics review by a general who I really respect, but, they went to everybody's units and asked them the same questions. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, man, we're good. We shouldn't have to have any scrutiny. Our guys go with these units that are having issues and are still keeping their nose clean. And that doesn't mean these are choir boys. These are pipe hitting dudes that go out there and do awesome things. But, I've been faced with the situation. Do you shoot or do you not shoot? Would you be protected? Yeah, probably. But it's an easy thing to armchair quarterback on the backside, right? But in the moment, especially when the shooting starts, making those quick decisions is very difficult. I watched a controller make a really good decision. He did warning shots, Vice, just waylaying a group of people that were coming after us in a hostile way. And he uses escalation of force intentionally, knowing that he had limited round count. And so I always thought about that. I was like, man, that's some discernment, man. That's some high level maturity right there. Because would he have been wrong? I don't know. I mean, maybe the 15-6 would say so, but the reality is that no one's really going to question at that point. So I think that's another positive that we have going for us.
But I think that's the reason I think that we're different is like you said, from the very beginning of your career, people are telling you you're going to be, as an individual, stuck with these other people, and it's up to you to do your job. Like there's no one on one of those SF or SEAL teams that really knows your job as well as you do, or knows exactly what you're supposed to be doing, or giving you a lot of guidance. Our guys, I was on team a few months before they kicked me out the door and said, go in bed with these dudes and do your job. It wasn't go be, like, I know I'm not a Green Beret, I know whatever. And it's very apparent when you show up that, like you said, you're on the team, but you're not part of the team. You know what I mean? Or vice versa, however you want to parse that out. So I think we do a good job with that. And I think in training too, when I know as a new instructor, when guys would start to mess something up, like an event, your first instinct is to jump in and be like, no, you're messing this up. And like having that senior instructor like put his hand on my chest and be like, now let's see where this goes. And let's see if they can work their way out of this, and see if there's an individual that steps up that can fix the team. I think that's something that we value as a community that I'm not saying is not valued in the other communities, but I think just the way that we are and the expectations in the future breeds that type of person.
Yeah. And I also think the mentorship and experience of guys that have done it come in saying, hey man, like, there are guys within the team room that hold a lot of influence, right? And when those guys sit down with a young guy and say, hey man, like I got all the cred, I'm telling you this is right and this is wrong. And you set conditions for those guys early. Within training, like when I was going through training, coming up, probably very similar to you guys, is that it was just slam you messed up, we just crush your soul. The approach now, you could say it's softer. I don't think it's softer. I just think it's more mature. And, the level of investment to develop, like you just said, you put a hand on a guy and say, hey man, like, this is why we're doing this. This is why it's important. I need you to modify this. I need you to work a little hard on this. Like I shared with Peaches and Aaron last time, is that you get a lot with that approach. There's a time and a place to hammer people. I think it still exists. I think it exists on the front side when you're weeding people out. But once you decided those are the guys you want, then it's not time to be like that. Now it's time to invest. And it's almost like a child, right? You're like, you're my boy now, so I'm gonna grow you the right way. And that paternal aspect to being an instructor is important, and then it's also important as a senior NCO, especially at the master sergeant level. The chief level, you don't have the same touch points. I think all of us wish we did, but you just don't. And so you got to grow those master sergeants to be those guys, and they're very capable. They need the cultivation at their level to take your job, and so it's this constant cycle that we relearn a lot of lessons from over the past thousands of years. These are not, leadership isn't a new idea. Some of the greatest leadership tenets come from, 600 years ago. So, yeah, man, I agree with you.
You talk about the master sergeants, and like I as growing up, I tried to, you're very critical of, maybe not everybody, but you're kind of critical of your leadership because you're seeing things from your point of view.
That's right.
They're making decisions from their point of view because you, as that junior guy, you don't know all the different directions that they're being pulled and all the different guidance that they're being provided. So you're sitting here as a junior guy going like, why would you ever make that decision? Right. Now, on the flip side of that, as somebody who's making a decision as a senior NCO or a commander, you also have to remember where you came from, what it was like as a junior level. So there's a balance for that leadership, right? But understand that there are so many variables in an equation or a problem set that there's a decision being made. It may not make sense to somebody at a junior level, but as a senior person, like I owe it to that person to not just explain to them the decision-making process and why we're going this direction, but like I should also, like if I'm going to a commander's roundtable or something like that, I should bring one or two of those master sergeants or one of the two of those captains that haven't seen that, just to bring them so that they can get exposure and see the decision-making matrix that is kind of ongoing in the discussions, that it's not just some some dude just going, I don't care. This is what we're doing. And you
That's
just
right.
deal with it.
Yeah, so that's a great point. And that's what I was going to say, bring them into the equation, let them problem solve with you, let them understand a lot of times it's tied to budget, right? Why can't I train the way I want to? Well, we don't have money for these guys and it's got to be equitable, right? Or this is the commander's priority. I don't want to make this like, oh, feel sorry for your leadership because they got a tough one. Yeah, you get direction from other people and guys should be smart enough to go, yeah, I get it. But yeah, I agree with you, man. Bring them in those senior leader meetings. Let them see it. So our unit was different back in the day. We had a ton of master sergeants. I think we had like, I want to say it was like 70 or 80 master sergeants across the unit.
Wow.
And so not every master sergeant's a leader. They're just getting paid as a master sergeant. And that's since changed. A lot of the guys are going back to other units, and we kicked and screamed against that at the 2-4 because like we want all experience. And then everyone felt like this should be an E9, right? Because you looked over at the Army and everyone over there's E9. But it was different requirements. Then you look at the Force and ST and they didn't have any of those leaders. And so then I started to understand that an E7 at a regular ST unit was asked to do a lot. And I was an E7, within one of the units within, our group. And man, I didn't know how to lead. I didn't know how to do it. I mean, I could set up a cool training trip. I know how to call the, flight 1 guys instead of a jump trip. But what I didn't know how to do was run a troop and be a leader. And so I was at a disadvantage when, I kind of stumbled into a leadership position first. I checked it up royally. I thought I was supposed to be a hard ass all the time, like yell. It wasn't me, man. Like my personality is kind of happy-go-lucky. I can be emotional about things at times, but I had to be authentic to myself and my leadership style, but it cultivated the hard way. It didn't cultivate by someone putting their arm around me and saying, hey, Chad, you can be so much better as an E7 by doing these things, and showing me the way like you're describing. So I made E8 and I was like, holy crap, I'm an E8. Wow, that happened quick. And here's a funny story about making E8 though. So I was an E8, I was still a troop chief. And I got a call from our chief of the unit, and he called me. It was like a Saturday, and he goes, "Chad, will you go to Libya next week?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "We'll talk to your family first and let me know." I'm like, "No, the answer is yes." And I was like, finally, E8s are going to get to deploy and do all these things. Because in the Air Force, I mean, if you're an Army guy listening, you're like, that's normal. For Air Force, it's a non-starter in an operational role, right? And I was like, yeah, a singleton operator going and doing this. I was like, yeah, that'd be awesome. And then I took over the training debt, which was really formative for me, and it taught me a lot of lessons. It taught me I had to reflect on my kind of failures as a master sergeant, young leader, and even when I was an E8 as a troop chief, I jacked it up pretty good. And I was able to reflect on that and say, okay, well, how do I approach this? How do I invest in people? How do I let them make sure I trust them and vice versa? And it was small enough of an organization that, stakes were a little bit, they weren't low, but it was like I could control more of it, right? I had 12 cadre, I had some support folks, then I had all the students. Then it built, I had more and more people, but it was almost like, it was like the universe was helping me. I was like, Chad, you're not ready for this. Let me help you. And we'll start small and we'll grow it. And then when they kicked me over to 2-4, man, even being separated by a few years is like going back into the snake pit, and here I was now the chief. I was an E8 when I came back. I wasn't even a chief yet. And I had friends that were over there that were still, hey, Chad, what's up? And I'm like, okay, well, hold on a second. How do I navigate this? And, but I don't think I could have been as successful as I was, that's obviously subjective, but, if I hadn't had those formative years, going to Green Team and leading that, and then, learn how to deal with support folks and kind of their unique problems, and understand that a career field it's not just PJs and controllers, right? And when I start to broaden my perspective, it was helpful. A lot of guys get that when they mature outside of the unit, at the 724, but it was a big wake up call for me that we had a lot of E7s that had really never led anything, and they were awesome operators. They were the best, but when they get thrown, they make E8, and then it's like, holy crap. So I was playing a pickup game as chief to try to develop those folks at their level and get them up on step where I should have been, get them there early so that they were better than me. And I truly think they are. And it was probably a lot of that was natural for them, that they were better than me. But I definitely think that if I was to say legacy, it was to invest in those folks and be deliberate about it. And I'm sure you guys do it really well. Like I said, I was a little late to the party on that stuff. So.
Oh, I don't know if I'd say I do it well. I'm still learning my path.
I think one of the great things about this podcast is I don't work with Jared or Aaron or any of those guys. We don't, like Jared and Aaron work together, but I have no idea if he's a good chief. So I just assume that he's maybe the greatest chief that ever lived.
That's my impression.
Right.
Yeah. And it's funny because I think about some of the guys from that unit that have come back to the 2 series units, and we it's not that we make fun of them, but it's kind of funny to watch them. It's like a baby draft when they get there. We're like, okay, well, you have like 18 EPRs you got to knock out next month. Oh. And it's just like when their eyes glass over and they just don't understand. It's it can be a tough challenge.
I don't know how you solve that unique dichotomy of, you want these guys are deploying nonstop, right? They're doing awesome things. And I mean, they're saving the world, and then they come back and then, hey, I need you to be really good about, these things. And EPRs, I hate, like, almost cringe saying it now. That's my favorite part of retirement, is not doing those.
I bet.
But
as it's tech sergeant season right now.
well, think about this, man. When you got 50 EPR, master sergeant EPRs, and they all come to you, that's a tough go, man. But I'm with you. And so, but there again, those guys are competing against the career field, right? They're not competing within our unit. And so if you want to give them a fair shake at being successful, you got to step up your game and learn that. And you're right, man. Some of those things weren't necessarily a priority when you're an E6 at the unit. And, but yeah, we gotta figure that equation out. Maybe.
And they probably shouldn't be as an E6 at the unit. Like, I would make the argument that, okay, so E7, yeah, they probably need to start stepping out of that. But I don't know that I want an E5, E6. Like, I want them to be the tactical expert, the tacticians that we want them to be and need them to be at that unit,
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that they don't bring a lot of goodness back. It's just that first smack in the face of, all the paperwork and all the responsibilities that come along with their rank. But, once they figure it out, I mean, my last deployment, I was out there with us, who became a chief. I think he's retired now as the former CFM. We all loved him to death, but there's a few funny stories in the beginning, and then he figured it out.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. Oh, he was famous downrange because all the telecons he would come on, his voice, the deep voice and the no nonsense, like. Yeah, that's stupid. Everybody.
I could tell you a funny story about him without telling who it is. It'll be funny, the folks that know who it is, and there'll be a lot of us. But I did a rotation up at Virginia Beach with him, and when you're up there, you're with your controller counterpart, and like you guys are a team, and so it's kind of make or break how your experience is going to go within Virginia Beach. And I was up there with him, and he never went out to eat. Never went out to get beers with me. He would eat peanut butter jelly sandwiches in his apartment. And I was like, this is like purgatory for me, cause I'm like, man, who do I hang out with here? And then, when we were getting ready to deploy, he was going to it was basically this strike cell in one of the units or places in Afghanistan. And a guy got hurt, another PJ got hurt. So I got flipped with another controller at the last minute. And then I was bummed because he was getting it on like all the time off the helos. And we were doing like these just miserable gaffes to target and then walking in, 6K and then getting compromised every now on target. We never make a target half the time. And, I was like, I did the hard yards of the alert with him. I had to suffer, eating peanut butter jelly sandwiches in my apartment. I didn't get to have the fun of deployment with him, but he's a stud though. And I think from the feedback I got from folks that came from that unit, told me he was awesome as a chief up there. So, but I know what you're talking about though.
Something I wanted to hit while we were, and it's kind of shifting from the ethical leadership and stuff like that, is recruitment. And there's I guess there's 2 aspects to it. You could talk about recruitment from our level and then recruitment from the unit that you left, but I don't want to necessarily. I mean, both are an issue, right? Because we need people at both. Mm-hmm. I don't know that we should talk about the recruitment at the unit you left, but just recruitment in general. it's challenging because, and I don't necessarily know what the right answer is. And I'm sure it's a multitude of different answers, but okay. So now we're starting to get the message out about what AFSPECWAR does, what everything that the entities within Special Operations Command do, and the goodness that we've done after the last 20 years and what we will continue to do. But I mean, how do we continue to recruit, in your eyes, how do we continue to recruit the right people now, and then also re-recruit for retention? I mean, it's something that we're dealing with now.
The honest answer is I have no idea. I mean, that's the honest answer. I think if I was going to take a stab at it, if they said, Chad, this is your problem to solve, I think a lot of it is the marketing campaign, which I think they're doing really well right now. I think that video that they put out is pretty awesome. That, it's got like a PJ controller. It's calling, they're calling CAS. They're in a tick in a convoy. That to me, that sends all the right message, right? But is it too late? And, we're playing catch up. Everyone's already done that. The CT war, like, we know the cool units. Everyone's seen movies about them. So I think one of the problems lies with the concept of the quiet professional. I think we coined that term out of like laziness almost. We're like, oh, we're quiet professionals. And they're like, no, because no one cares what we have to say, maybe. But the past 20 years have been pretty darn exciting, and the fact that controllers and PJs have been on every mission, that all these, high-end units have done, is a sales point. From a marketing perspective, that's the gold, you know what I mean? But all that stuff's, come and go. Now, how do you recruit for this next fight, like we talked about last time? And I have no idea, man, because it really depends on what strategy they want to approach. Do they want to build people that can integrate better with conventional forces? Perhaps they do, do we still want to be these really high-end specialists that have these special skills? That stuff sells in itself. I don't think ATC sells. It doesn't sound sexy, but when you understand what the airfield mission is for access, it is cool. And then, the JTAC stuff, I mean, that's obviously, it's awesome. It's a cool concept, but, PJ, I think, has always been the kind of easy one to sell. It's like all these, doctors that jump from the sky and do all this cool stuff. And, but are we capitalizing off effectively? I don't know, man. And then the other piece is, recruiting, like, who do we send out? Like, that's like almost like a punishment, right? If you're an operator and you get sent to one of these duties, but if you could do it, incentivize it for guys to do it, like short stints as a break, maybe we get the message out that way. But I honestly, Peaches, I don't really know, man.
So that's actually one of the things that we have kind of explored, not explored, but we are starting to get into that realm is now that we kind of have that time back home and we're not, we're still training our asses off, but we're on more of a cycle now. So we've been embedding a little bit more with the Special Warfare Training Wing and the training group and some of these other college ROTC vets. Like Aaron just went and hung out at Ohio State for a week and visited and talked with a bunch of debts. I know Trent and I have done a bunch of Zooms and we're getting more of those, and this is outside of like One's Ready. This is like, and you're actually TDY, you're on official duty. And there's, after Aaron went on official duty to Ohio State, several guys at our unit came and said, hey, like, how do I get on something like that? Because I would love to go out there and try and give back. Because I think our guys, as hard charging they are and, sharp and steel badasses, steely-eyed killers, like they still want to give back. They still want to, they're social butterflies. They want to get out and mingle with people. And that whole quiet professional thing that's beat. That's very 90s, right? And I think it was probably out of laziness because messaging is hard. Getting an effective message is hard. The SEALs, they do a great job of it. Like we still haven't figured it out and we're working towards it. So we are trying to do those small stints. That way you're not getting hit, as a recruiter and, as a CCT, PJ, SR, going to go be a recruiter and you're kind of stuck for 3 or 4 years.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that would be like one of my greatest fears unless I, had a reason to get back for family or something like that. And also it's the right guys. Right. And so you send a guy like Aaron who is charismatic and he's done the job for a long time. Like those are the guys you want, engaging. Every service, every career field has, their lemons. So being discerning as a senior leader and sending the right guys out. I know you said don't talk about my former unit, but, but I think there's some parallels there, right? So, you're recruiting, and it's a microcosm of the bigger recruitment, right? So it's smaller, but getting guys to integrate and train together is important. Getting more cross trainees, getting them involved in training is really important. And then opening the doors, to kind of people seeing things and understanding them. It kind of sucks that everything's down in San Antonio, because it really limits, our access. The SEALs in
San Antonio
Coronado
is wonderful.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's a great town. I spent a lot of time there, man. But it's not located in a spot that's easy to access. It's although it's centrally located. I think San Diego's a great spot for them. They also have Virginia Beach. I'm not saying we get the what was it, STARS team back together. I don't know what that even is.
The Special Tactics and Rescue.
Yeah, the jump team
squad. Yeah, that was awesome. I loved it.
Were you on the STARS team?
Hell no, but I enjoyed it. Like Bill Adams and some of those guys were on it, and they loved it.
I'm sure it sounded like the best gig ever. I mean, Ron Thompson did it when I was at Nellis, and I was like, man, I want to be a part of that.
Yeah, exactly.
But I don't know what the biggest return on investment is. But every time you see an interop thing like these SOFIC events where guys are in boats and shooting stuff, kids think Navy SEAL. They don't think SWCC guy. And so when they see a dude, fast from out of helo, they think, special forces, and it might be a PJ, a controller. And so I don't know, maybe we get like yellow camo or something. I don't know.
Jeez.
Bright red.
Yeah.
Like, hey, we're different. We're PJs and controllers. And so I stopped. I'm saying I haven't said SR enough. Sorry, Trent.
I'm used to it. It's fine. No,
Well,
we're
you guys
around.
are quite professionals now.
I'm trying not to be. It's just difficult, And then, I don't want to go on a whole tangent about SR, about how I try to tell people what we're getting into, and then they're like, "But you didn't tell me anything." I'm like, "I told you what I could tell you." All right,
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm super weird about it. But I think when it comes to personalities, like you were saying, you guys, we've had Trey Free on the podcast.
Yeah.
And I can't talk to that guy, because every time I talk to him, I'm like going to my wife being like, "Hey, Rag is pretty nice this time of year." But he's the perfect guy. It's I can't talk to him, otherwise he gets me going on that thing. So yeah.
No, for sure. It Trey's a good example of a guy who he's kind of separated himself from the pack, and he's got a different perspective on recruiting, life, and all those things. We have guys out there that are, have not similar attributes to him, but they're kind of deviation. So let's identify them and empower them. I never was offered a recruiting gig. I think it'd be kind of cool to go to a bunch of universities and talk to folks. But I think it happens at high school, planting the seeds. So I live down here, Northwest Florida now, and these are big military communities. You got Eglin, Herbie, 7th Group. And so the kids, they get it, man. The kids here, like football players, they had a flyover at the high school football game here. I'm like, dude, this is awesome. This is, afterburners, everything was the coolest thing I've ever seen. And so these kids are growing up in that environment. And so they're probably more receptive or susceptible to kind of that influence, right? But it's being deliberate. So the guys of the 2-3 down here, are they going to high schools and with full kit? They're rappelling from the rafters, for a I don't know what they call it. Like when everybody's in the gym. I don't know, man. I don't know if that resonates with people or not, but I don't know.
Well, I mean, it showcases the capability. No, I can tell you, just having been at the 2-3, at least at the time, they weren't sending anybody out because we were focused on training. But I think it's a maturity level, and it's once you reach a certain point, you're like, man, really should try and give back, to a community that's been so good to us. I mean, at least the three of us talking on here, it's been a really good community to us, not just Special Tactics, but SOCOM in general. And I'm honored to be able to, that I can, and it's not part of my identity. It's not something that defines me or anything like that, but it's just it's been so good to me. It's afforded me some fantastic and amazing opportunities, places to travel. And it's just kind of a way to go, thanks and let me help.
That's right. Well, that's a great perspective, man. I don't have those touch points. I never did recruiting. I know it's a challenge. I know it's difficult. And then even if you get, thousands of, candidates, how many are actually going to make it? And it's a tough problem, man. But, ST isn't the only one, or special warfare isn't the only one dealing with this. All the services are. They're all trying to find unique ways to access people, because that's the commodity, right? And so, the SEALs probably aren't having as much of an issue as everyone else. I mean, they're pretty much killing it. But SF, big army.
Get out.
What's that?
No, I'm sorry, I was kicking myself out.
You mean to leave?
Sorry.
All right, beat it.
Yeah. I think that SF is, from what I hear, similar problems, but SF traditionally was grabbing from inner service, right? And so it was like guys that have been there for a few years. And so maybe that pathway gets reinvigorated for them. And maybe we need to start, capitalizing off that pathway of folks, because there's probably a lot of like awesome maintainers that just didn't know about this job, before. And we had a lot of cross trainees in my NDOC class, and we had a pretty good handful of guys. Only a couple made it, but
yeah, we're trying with the sister service folks and all that other stuff, trying to make it as easy as possible. But I think one of the things we need to do is, and I think one of the reasons we started the podcast, is we need to connect the young people's current reality with what we're doing. And I think some of those, like, we all love those videos where it's very analog. We take contact, we drop bombs, or we rescue people and all that other stuff. But as we start to talk about that ambiguous problem-solving future that we're moving towards, making those connections between, the Qs of the world and the 007s, and you still need the guys that know when to pull the trigger, not to pull the trigger. I'm only using James Bond quotes because I couldn't think of any Wolf quotes that we can actually say out loud.
Yeah.
On the podcast.
I thought you were going down some like QAnon route, man.
No, no, James Bond. Ooh.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's hurtful. That hurts. Yeah. But you know what I mean? Like their reality of the digital landscape of where these folks are growing up and the things that they're good at, and taking the skill sets and the things that they care about and value, and showing them how that transitions into the next generation fight. I think we're just kind of scratching the surface there, but I think that's one of the reasons that we're all out on the interwebs trying to get their attention. Yeah,
you're right, man. And so, yeah, the, patrol to contact concept, it's cool because it's, rounds flying, but the reality is, that there's a lot of other stuff that goes on that's, requires, like you said, problem solvers and guys that are creative. And if we can continue to get those guys, we'll continue to be relevant and have high performing dudes. And so I spent a lot of time in Somalia and Yemen. I did about 4 deployments to each. And those were deployments early on before like there was big, FOBs all through Somalia. And we'd go in with a really small group of guys, and I'd be in the back of a local cab driving through. I didn't even know where, and I'd have a rifle and 2 pieces in a backpack. And if I needed it, it was going to take me a second to put it together. And, and getting there and being a part of the solution, being a part of the conversation, in these KLEs, because it's such a small team, right? And as long as you bring value to the table, as long as you can bring, good perspective, my job is contingency planning, right? I'm the PJ. I got to look at how to take care of all these people and get them out. And when you're using civilian aircraft, that's really difficult. How do you communicate with these folks? We don't have CAS. So what are we going to use for, these non-traditional ISR platforms? And so it really becomes kind of a cool problem to solve. And also the stakes are high, right? Because you have no clue when this is going to go bad. My time in, Yemen, during the Civil War, it was a very small crew of guys were out there, and we had no idea what things were going to turn into. And so my job is to figure those problems out as a PJ. And if I wasn't locked on and understanding all of the components of like, being a rescue guy previously, doing the assault stuff, and then going into this world of, kind of unknown ambiguity, I don't know if that I would have been very prepared. And so those guys that are coming behind us now, those are selling points, man, because they're going to get those experiences. Not everything's going to be, fighting these major combat operations. We're still going to have the skirmishes, and, these are going to be resource depleted environments. And by that, I mean, you might get infill, but you probably get an exfilled until a certain specified date. You get an injury. Yeah, he's not flying out today. He's flying out 3 days. So what do you do? And so it's really going to create a challenge, which I like challenges personally. And I know most of our guys do, because it's exciting, one, and it makes you think, and it makes you get better. And so I think those are the cool kind of one-off missions. There's a lot of them to talk about. Some of these are sensitive stuff, but the guys have been doing it. The guys are in Africa. Africa's a good example. You won't talk about classified stuff, but they're all over the place, and Africa is huge. The geography, North Africa is over 1 million square miles. And so how do you approach that from a CCT perspective, access? When you start looking at landing, what can we land on? Do we need to start going innovation with aircraft and how they land, within dirt? And, for the PJ, like that's a really tough position to be in. It's like, you better get your field medicine ready. You're not going to have aircraft flying overhead. You're not going to have a cache nearby. And so, these are the unique problem sets that are coming for the guys now. And I think that the right people will still want those missions. But they also, and we talked about this last time we chatted, is that they're also going to have the reality challenge for the shoot 'em up CT war. They're few and far between. Guys are still doing them. I heard some cool stuff recently. But it's not going to happen. It's going to be kind of feast or famine for some guys in that respect.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Chad, I'm going to wrap this up. Not surprised. Always a great conversation with you. Love to actually meet you one day and sit down and BS with you, but I guess I'll just have to do it over Zoom on a podcast for now.
Yeah, man. I appreciate you guys having me, especially on early this morning. I haven't yelled at my kids yet. They've been pretty good. They haven't kicked the door down. So.
Yeah, I got the dog in here, but she always. Most people can hear her huffing and puffing. She gets restless, but awesome. Thanks again for coming on. Really appreciate it. I know you've got another podcast you're hopping onto here. Maybe not today, but here pretty soon. Yeah. So old Mike Ritland's podcast. So you'll enjoy conversation with him. I know that you guys have worked with each other in the past. So again, you've always got an open invite to come on. So, and then I don't think we've overlapped conversations or topics too much on this one. So we'll just keep digging after it and try and solve all the world's problems like we do.
Yeah. And hopefully it's value added for younger guys to hear this. And like I said last time, it's kind of making sure this information is relayed, so it's not lost in the shuffle. But I appreciate what you guys are doing, and I appreciate you guys cultivating the next set of guys. So a lot of respect.
Absolutely appreciate it. So everybody, thanks for joining in. And like I said before, make sure you're following us, leave a review on Apple Podcasts, follow us on Spotify and all that kind of good stuff. And of course, leave comments, shoot us questions, and we'll get back to them as fast as we possibly can. All right, everybody. See you later.
Later.